Yeah, good. Yeah, we've had a couple of instances of that too. Yeah, that's nice checks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, okay, welcome everyone to Douro-Dummer's short-term rental committee meeting. We have our participants joining via Zoom and from our council chambers. I will do the roll call, and please raise your hand if you would like to speak on a matter, and I will call on you. So with the roll call, I'll ask you to raise your hand and state your presence when I call your name. We have committee member Richard Clark in attendance. Committee member Suzanne Corals, sorry, I hope I pronounced these right.
You did.
And committee member Nina Janosek. Yeah, I see her wave there. Committee member David Cobb here. And committee member Doug Owens here. And committee member Jeff Martin here. Okay, welcome all committee members. Thanks for joining us this morning. And we also have our staff with us, Alana Arthurs and acting clerk Martina Hartwick.
Good morning.
Morning. And Sarah is not available to join us this morning. So Martina, oh, sorry, Tara will be joining us maybe later in the meeting, no?
No, she won't.
Oh, sorry. Okay, no problem. We have our two lovely staff member girls here that's going to take care of us this morning. With a quorum of the committee in attendance, I will call the meeting to order. And now I would like to do the land acknowledgement. And pardon me if I do make a mistake on this land acknowledgement. It is kind of a lot of words for me to say, and I haven't said it many times, but anyways, my apologies before I say it. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mishi Saga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care, for their teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor those teachings. Next, we have any disclosure of pecuniary interest. Not seeing anybody here. Show of hands. We'll move on. Adoption of agenda. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the agenda. Suzanne. Need a seconder. Doug. All in favor? Carried. Okay. We have the adoption of the minutes and arising from the minutes of our committee meetings for May 18th, 2023. Can I have a mover and a seconder for them minutes? Jeff and Doug, all in favor? Carried. Okay, under new business, we have a lot of stuff that staff has prepared for us, and I want to thank them very much for all their hard work and a lot of work to pull this all together for this meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Alana here in a minute to go through each one of them, and I'm asking the committee to basically to take a look. We can dive down into each one separately if there's something that somebody wants to talk about. But if we can expedite just the basic for the basics of what we're looking at, and have an expedient meeting by that, not to get too much stressed out on small issue, if, bring stuff up, I don't want anybody to think that they can't bring anything up, but if we can expedite for the most part, if people are happy with it, then we'll move on. So I'm gonna turn, without any further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Alana to address each one of these. So thanks, Alana.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, one quick question.
I just had a question. I just want to put something in, you just bring something up to everybody here, like, we need to go back to why we're here, right? Like, we're here because we had some complaints, so I just want to ask some of the people that had problems last year, how many times did you have to call the police this year? Or how many complaints have you had to launch this year, do you think? Doug?
Myself personally?
Yeah, like you had some issues. I just wondered how it affected you this year.
Just one.
Just one, okay. And Richard, you had some issues there that dogs and things like that. How many times have you had to call a dog catcher this year or have an issue with that?
I deal with it locally, but there's been 2 dog issues,
Okay.
some dog music issues, but I'm not a person that really calls the police. Like, I think I've called the police once in my life, so, and that was necessary, so you kind of just put up with it because
Yeah.
you feel silly calling the police, right? Like,
Well, I mean, if it's a legitimate claim, it's not really silly, right? But if someone's bothering
This was
you,
something where it was dangerous.
but that's where the police would determine that, right? Yeah. so
Yeah,
yeah.
so.
Suzanne, where you had garbage issues, right? You had some problem with people leaving garbage or something?
This year it's been barking dogs.
Barking dogs, okay.
And just a general nuisance, people, using in the islands in front of us,
Right.
using them as their latrine and things like that. But that's been an ongoing issue for many, many years. It's,
Yeah.
that's not something new.
Okay. I guess I'm just getting at the fact that, if we're not having as many issues here with all the, people coming up, maybe it was a time that there was a little bit more people at home because of COVID and things like that. I just, this whole licensing and all this, is it really necessary if we've got the things in place like bylaws and police to look after things, and we have our local, people to work in communities and things like that, to try to keep community here on this. And without over licensing, over rules, overreaching on our, and not just a committee member, but as a person that, owns property in this township, I want to have some freedom respectfully to do what I choose to do with respect to my neighbors. But I think we also have to be very aware of where we bought, where we live, in proximity to others, to main channels, to where we've done, how much money we've spent. All these kind of things are all factors that fall into it. So I just want to try to remind everybody that from the agenda, it kind of surprised me because I see all this bylaws. Today we're going to discuss some of the options. I'm feeling like I think there's a bit of overreach here, and I think we got to be careful not to over license our neighbors and make something here that could become a really slippery slope. Furthermore, I don't think this township can afford all this licensing thing. So I want to bring that up as a strong point before we spend all this time talking about this. Can we afford it? Can we afford one lawsuit? Can we afford a group of homeowners getting together and suing the township? Are we putting ourselves in a really crappy spot as a small township? Can we afford this?
I think we're getting a little bit ahead because I think we're gonna sort of cover some.
Okay, but I'm
of
just,
the discussions.
we're concentrating on all these licensing. I think
So the direction of the committee at the last meeting was to bring back options for all of these things. And that was the conversation as we looked at bylaws being an option, licensing being an option. The Granicus came from another discussion, which I will talk about, and the municipal administration accommodation tax. So it's broken down. We provided drafts, and this committee at this point can direct staff to say, yes, the nuisance bylaws seem. It's likely we're going to go forward with nuisance bylaws regardless of this committee. That will be a direction of council, but you have the opportunity to provide some input, and then we're happy to go in and rework those drafts if necessary. The licensing, I expect to have conversation. I've taken this from another municipality that is similar in size and makeup with ours that seems to be working for them, but I do anticipate that there's going to be different feelings on how we want to move forward, and that was sort of the intent today, to get some kind of a consensus. I'll explain the Granicus. And the financial component, absolutely. We have the cost from Granicus. There's certainly a cost to licensing. So I think all of that is going to come out in this meeting, and that's the purpose. And hopefully we can get something that ultimately we're going to take to council, and council will make the ultimate decision on how it's going to be enforced.
The reason I'm saying this is because I heard what the mayor had to say about our township and sort of said that in Ontario, this is how they're doing it, and it's not even in place. So I just thought that was a bit of a overreach on the
Are we talking about the resolution?
the mayor, just how she talked about licensing in Douro-Dummer, how they're gonna be an example, and how she was speaking politically about that. So I just taking that, going in and seeing if there's a draft written up, or we're looking at things, I just thought, I think we need to remind ourselves why we're here. If there's not a problem, why are we going to all this? Doug just admitted there was one challenge. Well, you know what, I could go with the challenges on my neighbors that live there all the time, and they're entitled to have parties and things like that, but am I supposed to say when they have 3 bedrooms that I better to inform the township because they've got 5 cars there? I'm just gonna do them a favor and let them know that it might not weigh on their septic very well. Do I become a whistleblower, start squealing on our neighbors? It's just, I'm feeling like it's you know, a little bit more of a, I think we need to go back to why we're here.
Jeff,
If there's not a problem, you don't need to make a solution and make up something. This is a woke agenda, and woke goes broke. We can't afford as a township to do this.
Jeff, if I might interrupt here, I think that's what we're going to do as a committee. We're going to go through each one and some of the whether the committee agrees, basically, I think if all the committee agrees on something, it's going to be something we can take back to council for whether they approve it or whether they don't. That's to be seen yet. But on all these issues that staff has put together, based on our last meeting and based on what the wants of some of the individuals, doesn't mean that it's going to be a consensus, but we want some kind of consensus that we can take back to our council and say, as a committee, we worked on this, we've looked at this, and in some cases, council might even have some, for example, maybe recommendations on noise bylaw or something different on each one of these points. But we wanted to give this committee a chance to address some of them issues and take a look at that. And anyways, and
As long as that's
have their
necessary.
say,
As long as
have
it's
their
necessary.
say.
That the want and the demand,
Yeah.
you know, the need and demand is there. If there's a need for bylaws, then definitely we need to do so. But if there actually isn't, why are we overregulating ourselves? So that's just my point. So I'm just trying to bring that up and try to adjust where it just seems like this is running away a little bit. Okay,
Well,
maybe I'm just.
we just want to start by going through each draft that Elena, and if the consensus is, no, we don't want to present that to council, well, that's the committee, up to the committee here.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, does that make sense?
sure, yeah.
Okay, and I did see, and I think you had your hand up there. Did you want to weigh in on something there, Nina?
No, I'm good. I just, thank you. Was it Alana that put all these together? I appreciate it's a lot of time, and I appreciate you putting that forward for us to have as a conversation piece. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nina. Okay, I'll turn it over to Alana to move forward.
Thank you. So as indicated in the report, the recommendation is really just to have this conversation. Staff is not bringing this agenda as a recommendation to put all of these things in place. This is simply based on our conversation. Certainly the documentation that we provided today is in draft format. We have not gone to the extent of making, any specifics necessarily to Douro-Dummer that might come out of this conversation, because it is a lot of time to gather all of this. So it certainly is a draft. We have looked at other municipalities. We've, like every good municipality, we take from others and try to perfect it. So some of that, you may see something that doesn't seem consistent, and that's probably why. We certainly have not gone down to the details of the financial impact. So that's something, again, that council will have to decide. Once this committee has a recommendation on how they want to move forward, we will have more specifics going to council that indicate the costs associated to each of these things. And we can talk about it, but we don't have those specifics nailed down today. Within the report in front of you, there was some information that was provided from various members of the committee, links. I've included them in this report. Hopefully you had the chance to take a look and read them. This really was for your own background information. We're getting a lot of information thrown at us about short-term rentals, positive and negative on both sides. So this information really is just to help you guys have an idea of what's happening in the environment and make your own decision on how to move forward. We did have a resolution that came from Selwyn, which we also included in this report, which council did support. There's been a registry of sorts that's been created in Quebec, and there was a request that Ontario do something similar. I think it went as far as for Ontario to do some regulation, which I don't ever anticipate is going to happen, but we did support that resolution, or council supported that resolution, so we provided that here as well. So really an attachment to that we had. No, just the resolution. And then just the information that's coming out of Oro-Medonte. So, you know, it's going back again. Again, we have no resolution there. So one thing that I did not identify in the agenda was to have a discussion about zoning, because we're just not there. We have nothing that we can go to anywhere where there's been any successes on either side. So we will continue to monitor that. And I think when it comes time to revisit the zoning bylaw, depending on what happens here, will dictate how we're going to manage any restrictions or any identified areas in the zoning bylaw. So I don't think that we're at a point for this committee to make any recommendations on zoning, although we certainly, you know, will have that opportunity. Council will have that opportunity, and you will all have the opportunity to have input when that zoning bylaw comes back. So if we move into the draft noise bylaw, again, I think these will come to council regardless. So I don't think we have to really decide whether or not this committee wants to move forward with these particular bylaws. This is something that's been in front of council to address the nuisance bylaws, address the noise bylaw. You know, we just did another bylaw with regards to the docks. A lot of these bylaws in the township are outdated. They don't have set fines. They're very difficult to enforce. So we're looking at a broad range of bylaws within the municipality. The animal control bylaw was another one. So these really are just for comment. If there's something in there that you see that you don't agree with, or you want to provide some comment on some changes, I'm happy to take those back. And again, we will take a look at these bylaws, and they will be cleaned up in sense before they go back to council. But I did want to have them here because they are specific to the complaints that you're hearing, right? The dog barking, the noise in general, garbage, that sort of thing. So I think and these would be applicable to the entire municipality. They wouldn't obviously be just for those short-term rentals. And I would like to think that it would mitigate a lot of the concerns and problems that we've had to date, at least on the surface with those bylaws in place. With the set fines, it would give us the option for the OPP to fine. It would also give us the option, if we had a dedicated bylaw enforcement officer, to go in and respond to those calls as well. So that's why these have been drafted the way they have. So if there's any comments or questions or concerns about them, I'm happy to take those back with regards to the draft noise bylaw and the public nuisance bylaw.
Sue?
I just had a concern about the length of time that it's restricted. Like the chains, the one under for power equipment, the chainsaw one at 9 o'clock at night. I mean, I have experienced that. I have a neighbor that regularly runs their chainsaw at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and it's quite intrusive. So I'm wondering if it could be lower than 9 p.m. That seems pretty lenient, actually. And the construction one too.
So, sorry, the power equipment devices, is that?
Yeah. What page is that?
Okay.
It's 4.14.
So, yeah, I mean, the power equipment is 9 p.m. So we can definitely take a look at that. The one above that is actually 7 p.m.
That one is for construction.
for
right?
construction. Yeah.
That's actually pretty intrusive too, especially in the summer, but I mean,
Probably, I'm just thinking you're throwing us in an
Yeah.
emergency situation.
oh, that's, yeah.
Maybe we could,
I think,
wording maybe around an emergency or something, or.
I think there's already wording
Yeah.
in there
Yeah,
that says that states that if it's an emergency,
Yeah.
it's
I just
outside the box.
Just want to point that out.
Yeah, oh no, I understand that, but this,
Okay.
and the other one,
Yeah.
the other one, who controls the noise from boats? That's a really intrusive one too, and I don't know if that's the OPP, if it's the county, if it's the municipality, but that's another actual noise interruption.
Water's federal, so you'd probably be looking at going to the OPP.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where you have to go.
Yeah, I would
Nothing
say
through the
so.
municipality. The municipality can't
Okay.
regulate it, so you
No, I
certainly
know.
can call the
But
OPP.
what if it's a truck on County 28 here to cross the south side of Stony Lake? Like, I think that's.
Sorry, Jeff, if Elena could just finish.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
so it's only the OPP?
You would have to contact the OPP,
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
thank you.
We have no ability
No,
to regulate it, nor would we have the ability to actually get on the lake and enforce that.
even if they're tied up to the dock.
Well, then, they shouldn't be for long because we have a new dock bylaw.
Thank you.
It's a slippery dog.
It's a Yeah.
Sorry, I see Nina's hand up there, Nina.
Thank you, Harold. When were the last bylaws put in place? And are these significant changes in terms of the hours? Because I think I recall looking into the construction one in particular because we're being affected by early morning construction starting at 6 a.m. And I think that's within the current bylaw. Is that correct?
Through the chair, to be honest, Nina, I'm not sure. Martina's just gonna take a quick look.
So the noise bylaws, 2003 was the last update.
2003 was the last noise bylaw. We can take a
Okay.
look at the time to see whether or not it's 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Later the time.
Okay,
We don't actually have a nuisance bylaw, we have a series of other bylaws, and they're just.
Just the noise one though. Is there a definite, or is there a time? It's past 6 a.m. I think the challenge sometimes too.
Construction. Noise caused by the erection, demolition, alteration, or repair of buildings or construction. Situated within 500 feet of an occupied dwelling on any day between the hours of 9 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock in the morning. So it's 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., except on Sundays, where no noise shall be created before the hour of noon.
Right. Yeah, I was surprised. It was very early. So we were experiencing it at 6 a.m. and I thought, my goodness, this can't be right. But we looked and it was 5 a.m. So I think this is a positive step. I'll take 7.
I think sometimes the challenge too with construction is just our limited construction season, right? And if you're late and people are only up on weekends and they're trying to get the work done.
Absolutely.
Trying to think of it from both angles, we may get some pushback on trying to reduce it more than the 7 to 7.
and just another comment I have on that as well, Nina. I remember a time when a truck was delivering materials and they had a backup beeper on it, and they were there and the complaint was no, there was no workers on site, but they were delivering materials for the day. And they were there, I believe, about 6, and it was outside of the hours. And we received a complaint about that. And it's kind of a, how do you let the workflow and people need their products delivered, of course, but that was a complaint because it was a backup beeper on a truck, and which is law that they have to be there. So it's pretty tough to enforce that. Just a comment. Okay, and any other comments or questions on from the draft noise bylaw? Okay, well, I guess we'll move on to the public nuisance.
Unless there's comments on the nuisance. This one is brand new, so we don't have anything like that with the municipality right now. So there's a few things in there that I think could certainly be an issue with short-term rentals that are identified there that might assist in dealing with some that are not as compliant as others.
Seeing no show of hands, everybody's okay with that draft bylaw? Okay. Moving on to the next one. Short-term rental licensing.
Thank you. So this one, we did look at a lot of them. We looked at a lot of municipalities. There's a lot of municipalities that I felt were putting bylaws in place, seem to be being done very, very quickly, that there's pressure obviously from councils and the community to put these things in place. There was some I was quite concerned about the way that they were put in, because ultimately with whatever we put in place, we want to be able to enforce it, because if we put a bylaw in place, it's unenforceable. You know, essentially we've lost it and we're not going to be able to go back. So as we looked, this one is very much like another municipality. There are some things that we modified slightly, but it certainly is inclusive of all the things that you can restrict within a licensing bylaw. So, you know, you have the opportunity, if there's things in here that you don't agree with, things that you would like to see different. I do feel like it is a compromise from some of the other ones that are out there, which are even more restrictive, and then others that are less restrictive. So this one to me seemed to be something that we could certainly work from and give some options on both sides as to how you want to move forward. So I'm happy to take feedback, and or if the committee wants to discuss it. If there's, I mean, ultimately, if we get to the ability of coming to a consensus amongst the committee members, that would be ideal. You know, staff doesn't have, we're completely impartial on all of this. So ultimately, we would just like the committee to have a discussion, let us know what you think is reasonable, and we will try to pull something together then to take back to council on your behalf for council to make a final determination.
Jeff?
Okay, the first off the top is how are we gonna afford to have someone monitor this? Because we have basically hire some, so we take the licensing fee, from my understanding, half of it goes back into tourism, so we lose half of it.
No.
Is that not noticeable?
No,
Okay,
that's the
anyways.
municipal accommodation tax,
All
but
right.
not our licensing.
Okay, so
So that all of anything that is revenue would stay with the municipality. And again, we have not drilled down on the financial component. That would be certainly in front of council to say, okay, because we didn't know where the committee was going to go. So if the committee all came in and I didn't anticipate that they would, but said, no, we don't want licensing. You know, that would have been a lot of work on staff's end to go through and try to calculate how many short-term rentals we have, how many licenses we're going to have, what we need as far as a staff person, what we anticipate as far as letters and administration. So
But that's how business is done. But I don't go out and give someone do their job and then give them a bill afterwards. I give them a cost so they can do budget. So I mean, we need to have these numbers before we even decide if this is something to consider, don't you think?
I don't think that this committee particularly was going to be totally focused on numbers. I think right now there's certain views on both sides, and I'm not sure that
Responsibly though, we would
So
have to
the-
look at all of it, and that's our biggest factor to not bankrupt this. To bring in some kind of rules here, to bankrupt our township would be irresponsible as a member, let alone a constituent of the community. Like it's just irresponsible.
So if this committee makes a decision on how they would like to go forward, I will come back with the financial components so you can have discussion about that. This particular one and the way it's drafted, like I said, similar to us, the staff person that I spoke to there said that this model, they were able to bring in a staff person and he felt that it was going to be relatively neutral as far as the income versus the output with having it managed. That certainly depends on what they have as far as capacity. We don't have a lot of administrative capacity right now, although there are some other things that are happening in the municipality that could warrant an additional full-time equivalent here that could take on part of this. This is not going to be a full-time job for sure. So there's just a lot of factors that come into play. So if I come in here and I say, yes, you know, we've gone this way with licensing, and then someone says, well, I think it should be $100 more, and the whole committee agrees, it changes everything for me. So it's a lot of time to go through and try to give you all
I
this.
appreciate all your time. I'm just wondering if we could save you time by saying this is not a feasible recommendation. We should move on to some other more important, like getting fire departments here in our township, like
So if the
representing.
committee says that, then our work is done.
Yep.
That's
Well,
exactly my
okay,
point,
all right.
right? So why would I
I'm
do the
just,
finance? So
okay.
Okay.
that's why we.
Thanks.
Just trying to get an understanding of- You know, cart before the horse is all I'm suggesting.
Thanks, Jeff.
Elaine, I just had a question about which municipality said that they could do this at a break-even cost, because every municipality that I've looked at that's implemented this is running a severe deficit. Kingston just came out, there was an article in the Sun the other day that they're running at 3 times loss compared to they're having enforcement issues. When I sat on the committee for Tudor Cashel, The implementation cost just to start the program was over $200,000. They thought it would take at least a 12-year payback, assuming that they could get everybody licensed and enforced. It wouldn't just be enforcement that you would need to hire, you have to hire more clerks. I'm sure you wouldn't want to be sitting there doing licensing for the time. The other issue is you are, not you particularly, but people who are compliant and running short-term rentals well are going to be signing up for licensing. If you look at all the other townships that are having issues with this, they are still very far behind in terms of licensing people who are the problem people. Lake of Bays, for example, still has 1,000 people that Granulus scraped off their software that are not compliant because they haven't licensed. How do you go and enforce that? The issue then is, are you going after people who are, doing things properly, or are you still dealing with your problem people because they're not going to license and they're going to wait for you to come, and then they'll just pay your fine, and then what problem has that solved?
Okay, thanks.
So the municipality, to answer your question, was Penetanguishene. They're
Sorry?
Penetanguishene.
Penetanguishene?
Yeah, so their numbers as far as, so they do use Granicus. And when we get into the Granicus, you'll see, I believe there's 4 different options that you can go to with Granicus and the breakdown of the cost associated to each of them. So they do use Granicus to do some of their work. They did not select all 4. They have their licensing model, and then they put in an administrative penalty, monetary penalty, which we do not have that set up here. On other issues, our bylaw department is looking at that. I don't think that it's going to make a huge difference in this particular situation. They do have the fines in place. His feeling, and again, it is new, but his feeling was that they would be able to have, and I don't know how many bylaw officers they had already. I don't know what his capacity was for existing administrative staff. So we would certainly have to look at our administrative staff and having somebody to assist. Granicus does give the option to do some things, but then there's, the whole providing personal information, which I don't believe we can do. So
That's right. I was going to speak to that with Granulus because they are an American company, so you are getting Privacy Act issues, especially with their requirements for reporting.
yeah,
And that has become an issue for other townships. Because one of the requirements of Granulus is if you want to issue a complaint, you must video or photograph the complaint. So you're going to have your neighbors photographing neighbors and videotaping them. It's not going to fly. And if the township supports that, they could be named.
Yeah, for sure.
so there's certainly some things to work out with Granicus, absolutely. There's 2 companies. Granicus is the less expensive of the 2, but there's a number of municipalities that are going to that direction, and partly at that hotline, I would say it's difficult to put that on staff, especially in a small municipality where people know people. So they are getting used for that purpose.
Granulus starts at 35,000 American a year.
So our quote's not that high. If you look at what we have here, it's, and when I went back and looked, Penetanguishene had a quote from the other company as well.
Is Penetang Tay Township? No, they're separate on their own. Okay, so Tay is around Penetang because they've moved in the other direction. Okay, that's fine. I can speak to that later.
So and Penetanguishene just seems like tiny is beside Penetanguishene and has a whole different challenge happening there. But as far as the numbers, I think they've done a relatively good job. I think he said that they were at about 75 short-term rentals, which is comparable to where we were. They ended up getting 45 licensed, so compliance, and they feel like they probably reduced the number to about 60 because that balance just pulled out and said we don't want to have to license. We're just not going to bother moving forward with this anymore. So not a bad return on investment in that sense, but. Again, it's relatively new there too. They just put it in last year, so there's still time will tell.
Yeah, time will tell. Just Kingston implemented it earlier, and it'll be interesting. We would have to have, if you go with that detailed reporting specific to the issue, to see what the cost benefit is, I think, over time.
Just Jeff, just for a minute. Nina, did I see your hand up there?
Sure. I think that the strengthening of the, quote unquote, good citizen bylaws is where we need to be focused. I think you guys have done an excellent job revamping those. And I think this is a very risky proposition for us to even look into and consider. I think our township, just anecdotally from the committee members in terms of their difficulties they've had this year. I think they can be resolved with the nuisance bylaws. I think this is a whole added unnecessary layer for us to entertain at this point. I think there's too many unknowns and too many risks for us to make the recommendation to move forward with licensing.
Thanks, Dan. Jeff?
Yeah, I forget what I was gonna say, but yeah,
I'd like to go back to the earlier premise when the township planner stated currently it's an illegal use. So either township enforces the current law to restrict the use, or we come up with a licensing regime that we can live with.
it's not the only option.
Sorry.
No, sorry, Doug, I disagree with that. I wasn't there for that video, but I watched that. My take on that is that the illegal use is the setting up of resort style things. When that bylaw was written, there weren't short-term rentals. And in fact, the Ontario Land Tribunal has already come back and said that it's not possible to outlaw them all. Any places that have tried to restrict them have to be grandfathered in. So if it was an illegal use, they couldn't be grandfathered in.
I'm stating words out of her mouth. She said it's a
Oh, I heard,
use
but I don't
under a
agree with that.
bylaw.
And I think you sort of pushed her to say that, and I don't agree with that take on it. And I don't think most legal representatives for the various townships would agree with that either. So
So,
guys have a difference of opinion.
okay, thanks for that.
If I
Sorry.
I think by definition, and what Christina had indicated is, yes, based on that bylaw, it would be an illegal use. To your point, there weren't short-term rentals. There's no definition for a short-term rental. And this is where we have the challenge back to enforcement. And that why at the time that council had this discussion 2 years ago, my recommendation was not to try to enforce all of those current short-term rentals in violation of the zoning bylaw, because we didn't have any case law. We didn't, and Oromadante, again, that's why we're following them so closely, because that's exactly what happened there. And the problem is you end up with so many legal bills, and there may or may not be a resolution. So I didn't want to put Douro-Dummer in the situation that we were going to be that cookie cutter and spend that amount of money with our legal representatives, because it just wasn't. And even our lawyers at that time said, we don't know, because there isn't the case law out there to be able to stand behind. So that's why we did not proceed with that particular option. And again, we are watching Oromadante, because I think that case will certainly be pivotal in how other municipalities handle it moving forward, and what is going to be reasonable when it comes to your zoning. So we'll have to then look at how they manage it, how they define it, and how we can restrict it. And if that is the direction of council in the way that they want to manage it, it will be enforceable, and we can proceed with the zoning bylaw once we have something solid in place that is actually enforceable.
Okay, thanks for that.
I just might add to that, I know some of the resident groups in that area have said that this will be a long, drawn out appeal, whatever the resolution. Some of them have said that they will take this as far as they can go, even the Supreme Court if they have to. So just going back to Nina's, I think we better be very careful, just even the certain rulings that come out before we make decisions, to see how this all plays out. It's gonna be a long-term thing, yeah.
Well, maybe
Sorry,
if I can comment as an ex-lawyer, if this is determined by divisional court in Ontario.
Right.
Supreme Court in Canada doesn't hear anything that doesn't affect other rights. They're not interested in this topic. Divisional court is how you can get in this.
Well, then it could go to Superior Court in Ontario.
No, I'm sorry. I'm a lawyer. Divisional court is a panel of 3 Superior Court judges. They're the ultimate say in this province.
I understand what you're saying, Doug. What I'm saying is, if they make a decision with the Ontario Land Tribunal that these people are still willing to push it further under charter. So, I mean, this is what I'm just reporting from what I've heard from the different ratepayers groups in the area.
Divisional court is as high as you got in this province.
So
Suzanne and then Jeff, sorry.
I have a question about supply, housing supply in Douro-Dummer. And I wondered if you would know what percentage of SDRs are compared to the single residents in the Douro-Dummer. Because I think it's going to become important in the future. There's a lot of stuff happening in Ontario with the housing supply. And I know from 2021 census, I think they reported there was 15 semi-detached residences in Douro-Dummer, and there was 10 rentals. That's all, and like, that's not very many. I mean, if I was looking to sell my prime residence and rent something in Douro-Dummer, I won't be able to. And I think that you'll find that there's a lot of young people that cannot rent because there is no housing availability here. So I think that's going to become more important. And I think that short-term rentals do affect that housing supply. I think people buy houses in Douro-Dummer to rent them out. And I think that there's less and less of a supply. And I don't know what the building starts are for the last 2 years, but definitely you can't, what I see on the lake is a lot of large single home residences that are not going to have any supply for rentals other than a short-term rental. So I think that we're heading in the direction where there's a provincial policy that's been there since 2020 about housing, and I think that we need to think very carefully about how we control STRs compared to the housing supply.
Okay, so anyway, about the licensing, we license people to rent for Airbnbs. If I'm not a person that is being licensed and I want to have people over every weekend, what's to stop all this? You know, you're almost persecuting people for running a responsible business and licensing and being forthright. Like, it pushes people underground. The other thing, this big issue, it has to be a level playing field. We start persecuting and monitoring a certain demographic of people, whether they're people that are renting occasionally once in a while. What about the people that, just for an example, have a big family and have people coming up every weekend? I've got 11 people in my family, and every weekend I have their family come up. And maybe we have a bunch of people. How do we monitor the homeowners? So we have a problem there that, you know, you have to have a level playing field, because me as a homeowner, if he starts getting licensing and things like that, you know, then everybody has to be licensed. Everybody has to fall under the same blanket, or else there's going to be groups going together and coming after this township. And we can't afford to be losing money like that. We can't afford to pick these fights. And if responsible business people are doing responsibly, are going to have no problem rallying together and saying, hey, listen, you guys are, this is an overreach by the township. There's an overreach by the Ontario government. There's an overreach for personal affairs. So I think we really have to be careful before we start looking at, you know, worrying about, you know, there's no one that rents on an Airbnb on Stony Lake is looking to rent a home in Douro-Dummer for a full time. These are short-term rentals between $3,000 and $5,000 and $8,000. These are not for something for someone that we're going to take away from a couple 30-year-olds that are looking to rent an apartment, because they're not going to rent on my house. They're not going to rent on Stony Lake. So your opinion is respected. That's great. That's your opinion. But unless there's proof behind that shows the numbers, that's not stuff we should be basing any decisions on. Noise of the lake, I mean, that's all, it's part of being on the lake. All this is about community. And if we can get community-based and community, responsible community interaction, then we can self-monitor. We have everything in place. This seems like a redundant overreach by the township. So this whole licensing thing, I'm really worried about how this is going to affect. We need fire department in our township. Our garbage isn't being picked up regularly. We got problems immediate right now, let alone licensing potential problems for one complaint, couple dogs, and some garbage. And and if there's a big problem, then this should be brought to, other people should be in here. We should have a forum of people sitting in these meetings saying, yes, we want to have reform. But as responsible neighbors, if I have a problem with my neighbor, I respectfully go over. If they're a homeowner and we don't get along, I guess that's the end of that story. Imagine if they're a renter and I don't get along, they're gone next week, it's pretty good. If I don't get along with my neighbor, we got a permanent problem. Anyways, I'm sorry, I digress.
Thanks, Chuck. Doug, you had your hand up?
I've sort of turned my mind off to the whole thought process from next door.
Well, you know what? Okay, we all know where you come from too.
Okay, we won't talk too much longer on this one.
Yeah.
One more from
Pardon me? Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I was told to fuck off.
I didn't say that at all.
Hey, order. There'll be none of that in this.
Well, I don't need any comments from him. I didn't say anything.
None of that in this chamber, sorry. Please just be,
I didn't start.
please
Want
be
to turn me
considerate
off?
of
Well, then
each
that's
other.
fine.
Please be considerate of each other.
You know who turned you off?
And each
Your job,
other's
right?
opinions. please?
Mhm.
I appreciate that. From both of
Turn
you,
you on,
please.
yeah.
Suzanne,
I guess the thing that I see is that, if you're running a short-term rental and you're renting it out 52 weeks of the year, you're not running it as a single residence, it's a business. And you're not paying property taxes accordingly. You should be paying them as a
No one rents
commercial
for 52
business.
weeks a year. No one rents for 52 weeks a year, Suzanne. It's
It
a
doesn't-
huge exaggeration, just like all your other claims. It's huge.
order, let Suzanne talk, please. Thanks, Jeff.
I gave that as an example. Even if you only rent it, what, 30 weeks of the year, it's still a commercial venture. It's not, you should be paying commercial taxes to the
You
municipality.
pay income tax. You pay income tax on your business. It's a business.
Order, Jeff, let her have her piece.
But it's not, it's not, it's made up
Order,
stuff.
Jeff.
Okay.
Please. Richard.
No, Dave.
Oh, sorry, Dave. Dave, you had your hand up, sorry.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 27 years for the company. I've never seen anybody really rent for that extensive amount of time. Your peak season really is July and August. Winter rentals are very, very rare unless you're within walking distance to downhill skiing. Snowmobilers tend to travel from destination to destination, only rent for a night or two. As such, they tend to take the larger cottages that have more amenities. Most owners with those don't tend to rent out as much because of the cost, or the return on investment's just not there for the odd weekend in the winter. Going to, a legal opinion when Saginaw Township was looking at commercial, short-term rentals are not a black and white commercial land use. It's difficult to say. This is from their solicitor. With legal certainty that if a homeowner rents out their cottage for a short period of time over the course of a year, the property is now commercial. Although in that scenario, it would qualify as an STR, the core use is still single detached dwelling being used in a similar manner to a seasonal home. So that was the legal opinion at Saginaw Township. I don't think I have never seen a short-term rental come across my desk where it's been a commercial operation. It's people trying to cover the costs and keep the cottages in the bank.
Okay, thanks. One more before we move on.
There is a situation on Stony Lake where one property owner has at least 15 different properties, operating them all as short-term rentals. That's not just trying to cover the taxes and pay the bills.
Right. You said one, deal with the one, not everybody else then.
So, folks, what I'd like to do now is basically, we can go back and forth on this issue all day. What I'd like to do is have a consensus of the committee on whether we want licensing or not. That will allow staff to move forward with bringing back costs or not. And if licensing is not something that this committee would like to see, I think we need to do this in a manner that we can basically just ask what the vote is for licensing. And if that is not the case, then staff will know what to do and to make them recommendations also to our council. So if I can have a show of hands of who is for licensing, just a show of hands would be great. Who is for licensing? And a show of hands against licensing. So we got a split. How do we handle this, Mark?
Through the chair, everybody's very passionate about their opinions on this particular situation. And, we knew that coming in, and
Right.
we were hoping that the committee would, different views and perspectives, we might come to some kind of conclusion. I don't think on the licensing that either side is really willing to waiver. I think it's probably best if we report back to council specifically on that, just to indicate we had a very divided committee on this issue. We'll provide them with the information that's been provided here, and ultimately council will have to decide on how they want to move forward.
So the purpose of the licensing is to monitor who's renting, right? To prevent garbage and prevent all these kind of things, right?
I think a lot of it too is also to generate the revenue to pay for the enforcement of those things. right?
So again, we're creating something to pay for something. It's not a.
I respect your opinion, but
I'm
this
just-
honestly is not my decision.
No, I'm not
So
saying you,
I
no, I'm
know-
not saying
I
you,
know
I'm just
you're
saying, no, I'm
trying
not, I'm not, and no time, am I at you, I'm just saying for the township, for this decision, and it's not about you personally, there's nothing personal, but I'm just saying, this is super irresponsible.
Council
And
will
not
have
you,
to
I'm just saying.
decide on where they want to put the resources. So if
We need fire
council
departments,
decides that
we need other
this
things,
is-
maybe the township needs to have a vote on licensing, maybe imagine if the township were about being monitored and licensed, holy.
Or as Lana has said, this will go back to council. It's not the end of the world for either side. It's gonna be up to council to decide which way they want to move forward, whether it be licensing or whether it isn't. And I think they have the final decision anyways, folks. It's not the end of the world. But that's where we're at. So we'll move on with
Sorry.
Alana's next presentation. Oh, sorry.
Just a point of clarification. I can't see everybody's hands, but are we 7 on the committee?
Through the chair, there's 6 appointed members, and then the deputy mayor sits in as the council representative.
And does his vote count? Because it looked like he
In
had
the-
his hand up.
He will have his vote at council.
That's right.
So here it would be a committee that we try to come to the consensus as opposed to having a single council member determine how the
Right.
direction of this committee goes.
That's
Just to be fair to everybody, the deputy mayor will have the opportunity at council to vote the way that he sees fit. But here is a representative, and he certainly can take back the information as well as staff will.
Thank you.
I believe the committee is split on that.
It is.
Okay. So anyways, moving forward. Alana, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the Granicus proposal that we have. So essentially, they break it down to 4 different opportunities or options. One is the address identification. Essentially, they go in and they scan the internet with the various platforms, and they try to match up where these short-term rentals are located. So if we put this in place and we have 50 that come forward and want a license, they would look at other areas to see if there was any that weren't being captured that were determined to be short-term rentals. They have a cost there. The annual fee, they did indicate this is in Canadian dollars. The fee is $6,523.34. Then is the 24/7 hotline. Again, if this is the direction the committee wants to go, I probably would say to council, the hotline is a good idea. It takes away from staff time. You're not left with somebody calling saying, especially in a small community, I'm your neighbor, that kind of thing. There's no pressure being put on staff to be swayed to file a complaint. This would be completely independent. The cost is just over $2,000. The compliance monitoring, that's where they will go through and they will actually send letters on our behalf. And this is where I do get a little bit concerned. I don't think that I want an external agency sending letters on our behalf. So I certainly wouldn't recommend that. Again, just over $2,700. And then the permitting and regulation or registration, again, that is, they would do all of the licensing. They would take everything over. Again, this is council's decision if they want to invest the $15,000 or just under $15,000 to have an independent company deal with the administration almost in its entirety. But again, we are small, and I think it's important that if council wants to move forward, we would retain some of the control over this. But again, this is, if the committee feels differently and there's a consensus, I'm happy to bring that back to council and indicate, the committee's wishes.
Just a question of what was the licensing fee that you guys were thinking about for our township roughly? Just a number.
I think it was 900.
So let's say $1,000, so we got 50, that's, that's barely, not really covering
I
much,
think it
does it?
was based on bedrooms. If you had 3 or more bedrooms, it was 900, and 2 or less than 600.
So let's say 1,000.
And then
So let's say we got 75 in our township, right? So we got $75,000. We're losing 15 or more just off the top. Then we have to deal with all the monitoring. Where are we gonna get someone to monitor work for township for $20 an hour? We're not gonna.
So
So
through
then-
the chair, the additional fees were coming through those that were not compliant. So there's a number of fees listed in the draft bylaw. So the 3 or more guest rooms was 900, 2 or less was 500. The renewal fee is the same. The license appeal committee, there was a fee for that. The inspections, there was a fee for that. So, and then on top of that, we would have the set fines for those that violate was 500, failure to provide a copy of the renter's code of conduct was 500, and then hinder or obstruct inspection was 500. So any of those noise nuisance bylaws, anything like that, there would be additional fines. So I think that's where the additional revenue is anticipated, is outside of just the
And then
licensing.
who pays for the fight back? So when I get just using me as an example, I get a noise complaint, I don't like that, so I'm gonna go all the way and hire a lawyer against the township. And then who pays for that? Everybody. I think we gotta be careful. Anyways, the numbers don't jive. We got $2,000 a person, and we got 75 rentals, which we don't in our township. That's still only $150,000. We do the math, it doesn't cover, it just, one little mistake, and we're in big trouble. We bankrupt the whole township.
If I might just add something, I believe, Alana, this piece of compliance is actually basically tied with the licensing as well, really. If the licensing does not go ahead, then like it's pretty much, this is the new point, right? So anyway, so I'll turn
I
it.
just think a point to consider too is, from my perspective, the assumption here is that all short-term rentals are good cash rents. I have a number of them that rent for well under $2,000 a week in this township. And if you're going to be charging all these fees, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because for them to recoup this, they're going to have to rent more. So if you're having some issues with rental, and somebody has to rent more to offset these fees now, then from some families that I have that rent 2 to 3 weeks in the summer, they may have to rent 6 to 9. So you're actually kind of increasing that. Yeah, you know, for them, it's a big effect. Somebody who's making, you know, 10, 12,000 bucks on a rental, it's not. It's just, but it's not the scale, I would say.
Okay.
If I may comment, as someone who's been in the lake for 73 years, we've always had rentals on the lake, no problem. They haven't been short-term rentals. If people need to supplement, they rent for a month. That hasn't created problems in the past. It's this transient population of constant turnover that arose from short-term rentals. I don't object to normal long-term rentals in the slightest. Supplement your income that way.
If I may respond to that, the dynamics over 75 years have changed drastically. You can go up and down the lake and you can see the houses that were built for guest quarters when people would come up in the summer and you know, dad would come up on the weekend and all that kind of stuff, and mom and dad would stay all year. Those days are gone. Most people can afford a summer vacation for a week or two at a time. Nobody really, I have not seen people probably in the last 15 years go for very long-term rentals. It's just, they can't afford it. They don't have the time to do it. What I have really seen, and I have to say this again, is that most of my rentals anyway are people looking to help offset their costs. You know, so and as far as short-term rentals, I don't know, my grandfather came up here in the 50s. I don't know if he stayed more than a week or two to go fishing. He had to work.
Okay, thanks. Back to Atlanta. Oh, sorry.
Just a comment about home sharing platforms and the billions of dollars that they're making. And really what they're doing is downloading all of that, the issues. They don't do anything but charge you a fee to get the rental. And then all of us are left fighting with our neighbors. All of the issues that we're talking about are really created by a home sharing platform that is not present, only collects a fee, and never deals with the cleaning, the garbage, the noise, anything. We're all left to, as Richard said, deal with it, right? So, I mean, if you're going to talk about home sharing platforms, one of the things they should be doing is, if there is a licensing program, that they should be making sure that they're in compliance if they've got a license. It shouldn't have to be you know, like that should be part of what they are doing. Not part of all of the compliance being downloaded onto every municipality. And they should be, we're gonna talk about the MAT tax, they should be collecting that. That's just a revenue stream for all of the municipalities. And that's not happening right now in a lot of the communities. And I think that's part of the problem, is that they're just not present. They sell the software and you find out if you're gonna rent all over the world. Like it's much different than it used to be. So I don't know, I think that things have changed, and my family's been on this Stony Lake for 120 years. So, and they did run a lodge, so I do know what I'm talking about. And I think that things have changed drastically. And what's really evident is that people have no conscience and don't care about the lake or the environment. They're just there for their week with their floaty toys to do whatever, throw garbage around the lake and everything. So I said, you know, I think that, yes, things have changed, but it's not for the good.
I gotta say something here. That's just totally inaccurate. That's just totally wrong. I dealt with Airbnb. I don't have an Airbnb anymore, but I dealt with Airbnb. And if I made a mistake, my neighbors could call Airbnb and put a note on it. So there's a way of monitoring. You can notify Airbnb that they'll take their license away if there's enough complaints. This is so far the other way. This is about working with the community and trying to make some kind of community standard here for licensing, not all these over the top things about worrying about what the world is doing all over the world with Airbnb. What about the short-term rentals that don't use an agency? What about them? So now we're gonna persecute just the Airbnb, just the VRBO, or now we're gonna persecute the guy that doesn't use them. So we have to be careful we have to blanket everything. So I'm just saying, what you just said there was totally inaccurate, because that is not, it is very monitorable. It is very informed. You can call the police and there's the feedback on there. People get reviews and they'll say on there, you can put right on as a neighbor, this is a horrible, you can see whatever you want. So that's really strong. So that's from experience, direct experience, my experience.
With all due respect, I have my experiences too, and they're not what you're.
With Airbnb?
I don't know whether they're Airbnb.
Well, there you go. But
Well,
I'm just saying,
there are 60.
you're speaking to something you've never
Wait a
had experience
second.
with.
I wasn't talking about Airbnb. I was talking about home sharing platforms.
You generalize everything. This is what our whole
Well,
committee
do you
has to
have
be
a
careful
home
about
sharing
generalizing.
platform?
Order.
I guess
Order.
that-
You charge a fee, but you don't look after cleaning or complaints or anything?
Oh, no, I do. I mean, I've been here for 27 years. You know, I mean, I contract out cleaners. I have detailed rental contracts. My code of conduct that I send to renters in terms of their contracts, in terms of when they get their directions, in terms of their household rules package, in terms of the automated emails they get out, in terms of the videos I sent to them on cottaging and everything like that, that make your code of conduct look like child's play. I collect security deposits. I have a protection plan in place for my cottage owners
Well,
that protects their property, even has bed bug coverages. It's issued through Lloyd's of London. You've all heard that insurance company before. You know, I screen renters. I'm just bringing in AI software right now. I can probably tell you more about you guys than you know about yourselves.
Promoting businesses and local businesses.
Okay, so I think we're all in agreement that 6.14, we would be, that again would only be in compliance with if licensing happened. I guess we'll move on to, and again, that will be up to council. I believe that we have a split in our committee, and I will inform council of what that split is as far as licensing goes. And that will be up to council to make that decision on whether they want to move forward with licensing. And I believe that best for us to do that and save staff time right up front, that council will know that, so that basically staff can get an answer back whether they want to move forward with licensing instead of wasting staff time on bringing that back to council. That's my opinion, and I think that's the best way for this committee for us because we have a split, so.
Do we have a record of all the complaints that are made for noise bylaws, dogs, all the stuff? Does the township have a record of, we've had 300 calls, we've got 20 calls? Is there a record there?
Through the chair, we certainly have a record of complaints. Would we be able to identify if they were rental units? No.
But I'm just saying, even we took the numbers as a number, just to sort of say, here's the demand in our township for problems. And then we can maybe isolate, it'd be easier then to maybe isolate where we're having those problems, because it could be just neighborly things. I mean, we get neighbors don't get along, we're not gonna get along. I mean, if I was Doug's neighbor, it'd be hell. So, just for example, because he's not gonna budge, neither am I. But part of the community is budging, is trying to work together. And part of the representation here, we should let our personal stuffs go. Okay, I'm not an Airbnb renter, but I'm not against it. But everybody should let their personal stuff go. We're here to represent the people, our constituents, our neighbors, not our own personal vendettas. So what we need to do is put our biases behind, and we'll do is best responsible decisions for our community. Not everybody is doing bad things. Majority, I would say probably 95% of the people that are doing these things are doing it properly. And they're probably gonna monitor and probably jump on board lights because they're trying to do the right thing. But to persecute the right doing people, you're not doing anything with them. It's like trying to take guns away from criminals. So again, is there a demand for this? All of this, is there really a demand for it, other than a few squeaky wheels?
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Nina, I see your hand up there, sir.
Thanks. Yeah, just to add on to what Jeff's saying, I think the report said that there was between 75 and 95 short-term rentals identified. And Doug pointed out that there's one person that owns 15 of those. And I think the risk with going forward, just like they have in the Oro Medante ruling, they said, it potentially renders illegal the benign, non-contentious occasional rental of family cottages for periods of 1 to 2 weeks. That's the majority of what we have in our township, is families that are trying to offset the costs, sharing with their family members. It's not about this one particular individual. Maybe that's who we need to focus our attention on, is the one person that owns 15 properties, not the law-abiding citizens that are trying to do right by their neighbors. And bringing in a licensing regime, again, I'm going to say it, I think is very risky for the township in terms of long-term legal fees. And I don't think it's right to the constituents that we make that recommendation.
Okay, thanks for that, Nina. I think we've dwelled on this long enough.
Well, I'd just like to say, I think right now we're being protected by high interest rates. If they drop back to the 2.5%, then it makes much more sense business-wise for more and more short-term rentals to begin and outside operators to come into our township.
That might be true. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball.
Can I respond? I would say I would say if that's the case, it's going to be in 2 or 3 or 5 years, in which time there's going to be case law that we can draw from. And it's not us that's used as the test example, the test case, us funding the legal fees to fight these battles. We can see how it plays out. Right now, this is not a real problem, and we're making a problem for the township, and it's completely unnecessary.
Agreed.
To say it's not a real problem, why are we here then? Because I mean, I know you're new to the council, Howard or Hero, but like they got a lot of calls. This has been a big growing issue. Even Peterborough County just acknowledged they're agreeing as a group to look at this. Just to say it's not a real problem that we're going up, I take offense to that. That's not true. It's just not
I understand true. There are real issues, and I understand you have had noise complaints and maybe you have a particular situation, but I think by and large, you said you have had 1 or 2 issues this year. I think we can deal with that with the existing good citizenship bylaws, have good neighbors, have good communication, but bringing in licensing isn't the answer to this.
But renters aren't my neighbors, and they don't follow the rules. A neighbor does. That's the difference.
What if he doesn't though?
Well, okay, I'll tell you one story this week. Sorry, I don't want to take up too much time.
But you just saying something.
Driving into my
Depends
house.
on where you live.
Driving into my house, and a renter's dog starts chasing my car and is freaking out. I have my wife in the car, I have my sister-in-law in the car. So I stop the car, I almost killed the dog. My wife jumps out and says, "Why is your dog not on a leash?" The dog jumps into my car. I then have to get the dog out of my car. This is 2 weeks ago. So I called the neighbor, I know her, And I said, what's going on? She says, I have signs everywhere for the renters to see. And we put leashes down by the lake and up by the driveway to leash the dogs to make sure that they're not running around because we know this is an issue. She goes, I don't know why they don't listen. I'll call them back again. So this is my point. It's not my neighbor. It's the people that are there for a week or 2 weeks. They ignore the signs. They don't know. And they're not bad people either, but they're oblivious. And this is the point that we can say all we want about it being neighborly. They're not our neighbors. They're vacationers that have paid money and are just loosey-goosey enjoying themselves. And that's great, but they're oblivious is what it is. They're not bad people. This isn't the park. This is just, you're kind of going, what's going on here? There's a dog in my car from some person that I don't know.
But what about if you didn't know them? What if it was a neighbor that always has dogs, that always come over, comes over and poops on your lawn? No, but I'm just saying,
But
now how
neighbors
many,
act
at least those
differently.
people are gone. I have a neighbor that the dogs come over all the time, and you just become friendly with the dog, give the dog a biscuit, it goes home.
Yes.
Whatever, but I'm just saying, you sort of try to.
Agreed, Jeff.
How do you monitor the
Well, you
full-time?
make accommodations for that, because I know the neighbor's dog. And that dog doesn't chase my car down the road because the neighbor knows it's gonna get killed.
But does that warrant to change the whole policy for township here, that no one's allowed to rent because a dog came down the road, like it just seems
I'm
so,
giving you one
it's
example.
overreach.
I'm giving you one example
I
of
know.
just this.
But I'd want to see 200 examples of that to see that there's a problem.
Agreed, but back to my original, there is issues we have to deal with. My concern is like these nuisance bylaws, I guess the nuisance bylaws are new, the noise bylaws barely changed a few hours here and there. So what we're saying is that what you're suggesting is let's not change anything and continue the way we are with the slightly different, with no real repercussions. And the reason I joined up for this is let's do something that actually changes it for both sides. So it's like, no one's saying don't rent, we're saying buy a license and operate under some sort of guidelines and
But
accountability.
how does that stop the dogs?
Well, because then maybe they say furry friends not welcome
Maybe
at
they
that
don't.
particular cottage if they keep getting fines.
Maybe they don't go, but this licensing me is not
Well,
present.
but then their license can be full, and this is where the accountability comes in. It says that if you're gonna keep allowing your renters to have these dogs doing these things, then your license can be full. And then you can get it back in 3 months, and maybe you start figuring out how to manage your rental.
So again, okay, now I'm just going up, so now I'm renting, they pull my license, because I got dogs running, and I tell the township, I'm just gonna keep renting, how are they gonna prevent that?
That I don't have an answer.
Well, but this isn't something real big, the enforcement is our biggest chunk of money.
Yeah.
So, and again, if we're enforcing this on a week person, on someone that's there for a week, what about the people that are full-time, we don't like our neighbors? Like, what do you do about that? And then all of a sudden now you got people monitoring, calling all the time, this dog's, we put too many bylaws in, someone has to look after this. And I'm just worried that we already have existing laws, we have existing bylaws, for dogs specifically, garbage, noise, everything else. Again, the squeaky wheel's getting the grease here, well, the squeaky wheel gets the grease out there. If someone continually monitors and they're making noise or doing something that's destructive enough to warrant some kind of policy, well then call the police, I'm thinking. And let their bill one there. If it's a repeat thing, the police are gonna get to know that this is happened 3 or 4 times. Well, then it's something to come to the township and say, listen, I've had 5 visits from the police that warranted, they've given 5 fines. Now we got something that the township can sink their teeth into and say, we've got a real problem. We got a guy that's renting 15 properties. Well, hey, if it's really 15, maybe it's 5, whatever it is. If it's a problem and he's the guy, well, let's go after him. Let's monitor him. Let's, stick it on him. And, but to blanket it on everybody, the pushback is gonna be unbelievable. You imagine if we got 75 renters and you got 50 of them push back and go to get their own association, say, we feel it's overreach and we put in litigation to the township, that'd be over for the township for the next, could be 2 years. So I think it's about being a good neighbor. It's about communicating with the neighbors. And unfortunately, sometimes a renter, but at least the renter's gone in a week. If you get some arson there, you can say, okay, well, geez, that guy was difficult or whatever, but they're gone. If it's a neighbor, they're difficult, then it's like, wow, then what? Then where's the policy? Then what do you do? So to punish all the compliance people is not the way to fix the problem.
Let's move on. Alana, I think we have one more item to speak about, and anyways, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, through the chair. So this essentially was just a discussion that we had, I think in the beginning, maybe our first meeting, just about the municipal accommodation tax. I did reach out to the county. Unfortunately, they didn't have any specific answers for me, but they were going to coordinate a meeting and get back to me. So I was kind of hoping I would have something before today. I don't. I can tell you the MAT is a 4% tax, 2% stays with the municipality, 2% goes back through the county. In lots of areas, it's just at the county and administered there. We have PKED, which there may not be an equivalent in some of these other areas. So I'm not sure if it ultimately goes to the county or PKED. And that's sort of the clarification I was looking for before coming back to you. But the bottom line is we keep 2% and 2% goes back into tourism in some fashion. So it is an option that we.
I misunderstood that, that's why I
That's
spoke
the
earlier.
50%, yeah. So again, we, we could look at that. I also don't know if we would have to have a licensing program to put that in place. We would certainly have to know who was renting, and there would have to be some kind of mechanism so that that could be an option if council chooses not to go to licensing, that we would investigate to see if that was still an option if council wanted to pursue that.
So that MAT would apply to every type of accommodation, right?
Correct.
And so that would level the playing field much more.
It's a municipal accommodation tax, so this
All
would
right.
not be specific to Airbnbs.
Right, it
short-term
would be,
rentals.
yeah, that's what I
So
understood.
the local cabin rentals and stuff.
Yes.
Go ahead.
My understanding with Matt is that that 2% can't go to salaries. Is that correct? You know, I'm not 100% certain on that. When
Through
it
the
goes to
chair,
promote tourism.
through when it goes to promote tourism, I don't know. I know from the municipality side, we could spend our 2% on anything,
Right.
but I would think it would have to be something defined.
And that is an accountable issue for 2%. So something would have to be set up under the township to promote tourism specific for that, no?
No, so it goes through the county. So I
Goes
don't
through
know
the
if the county manages it or if PKED manages it. And that's what I was trying to get clarification on. So the Peterborough Port, the economic development. I think it probably ends up there, but I'm not 100% sure, but they would be in charge of managing that.
Is
2%.
Peterborough charging one? Do you know?
The city of Peterborough
I believe the city of Peterborough does.
I know it's usually larger municipalities that have infrastructure programs to support a diversity of tourism.
I
So
believe.
infrastructure is a key component of the MAT tax.
I believe Peterborough does, but don't quote me on that. I think they do, but I'm not sure. Well, I know you get charged on the hotel stay when you stay there.
Mhm.
So I believe that's true.
And I guess the only other thing, I mean, and we don't have it on the agenda, and without going back and back and forth on the existing options that are here, is there another option? You know, you talk about the ones that have multiple properties and, feeling it's a commercial business versus the smaller mom and pop shops. Is there something that staff haven't captured that, we can continue to look at? I certainly don't know, but if there is a feeling from this committee and something else that we can look at, we're happy to take that back as well.
Okay. Oh,
I just about the city of Peterborough, so they did have a 3% program they administered themselves. And then when the MAT program was introduced at the provincial level, they adopted that instead of their homegrown program.
Just a quick question on, so what's going back to council, it's just whether to proceed at all in looking at licensing, or is it in the current format they put here? At the current state, like it's like we're looking at this specifically or proceeding, or just in general to say, are we going to take this any further?
well, sure.
Okay, through the chair, I will draft something back to council. Certainly, the direction is to deal with the noise and nuisance bylaws anyway, so we will have those drafted. The balance of the information, I think the report will just indicate, we'll attach the minutes of our meetings. We'll make sure that council is aware. Certainly, they can always watch the live stream and our deputy mayor can speak to it. We'll provide them with the information that was provided here and just a synopsis of what occurred and where we're at. Ultimately, I think council would love to have a recommendation, but if that's not possible, that's not possible. And ultimately, they're elected to make these decisions, so they'll be tasked with doing that.
Sorry, Nina, I see you. Hand up there.
I was just gonna ask, so that 2% that would be collected as part of the MAT tax, can you guys, I couldn't hear the answer, could you use that for a salary? Like if you were to hire somebody within the township to address complaints? And what I'm getting at is, right now, I think we're far too early in the process to be considering the licensing. I think like I've said before, there's too many risks. but is it possible that there's some way to use that 2% to offset any expenses in terms of reporting, so we can at least have an understanding of what the situation actually is? What are the types of complaints, so we can move forward, in a year or two when there's bigger issues, so we have a better understanding of what we're actually looking at? Is it just one person that's generating all of the complaints, that has 15 properties? I think having that might be beneficial, as opposed to just as an alternate to a licensing regime that gets put in place and really affects these people that it shouldn't be affecting, and creates all kinds of burden on the township. I think there's, like I've said, too many risks, but is that an alternative, that you bring in the tax and then use that to offset expenses in the short term?
Through the chair, my understanding is there's no restriction from the municipal standpoint. So again, I would like to get clarification on that, but my understanding is that the municipality would be able to take their portion of the 2% and allocate it as they see fit. So if that was council's direction, absolutely.
Okay, just an idea.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank staff very much for putting all of this information together for us. I think it's been really helpful, and I really appreciate it, and I'm sure the rest of the committee does too. Thank you very much. Thanks, Howard.
Okay, well, I guess at this time I'd like to thank the committee and for all of the comments, and thanks for trying to keep order here today. And I don't really, unless there's something else that I am not unaware of, I think we pretty much have most of our recommendations from the committee. I know that we are split on the licensing, and I think that will have to come from council's decision on where to move on that, and to give staff direction on that. But I would like to definitely thank all of the committee for putting their input into this huge topic and issue. And anyways, hopefully Alana will let us know when this is going to come to council, and let all the committee know. It will not be, I don't believe you'll be able to speak at that unless somebody feels that we need to talk more about this issue. But I think we've, as the old saying is, beat the horse to death. And if we can move forward then and let council decide on a couple of them issues, I think we're going to enforce our bylaws, and hopefully that's going to take care of a lot of issues. I truly believe this. In talking with Selwyn, they enforce their bylaws, and since they've done that, they have not, and what the mayor's response was, they have not had one single complaint. So I think by doing that, I think might resolve a lot of issues. Or that's my thoughts anyways, but just, sorry, go ahead.
Just one quick thing before we adjourn, just following Nina's comments with regard to the municipal accommodation tax. Outside of licensing, is that something that this committee would, I'm not going to say necessarily be in favor of, but as I communicate it back to council, are we split on that as well? Or is there more of a consensus that is something, if we don't have the licensing in place, that would be acceptable to move forward with?
So would that go to places like Burley Island Lodge and go places like everywhere?
Yeah.
That's gonna hurt tourism. They're already having a tough time.
It would be all accommodation.
All accommodation, yes, throughout the township.
If I could ask, if you don't have licensing, how do you enforce accommodation tax? Because you don't have a record, do you?
We would have to obtain a record of sorts. So I think if we're looking at, the businesses that are already renting, the lodges and that sort of thing that we are already aware of, that would be easy to find. I'm not 100% sure how we would find all of the short terms, but we would have to, whether it was having, the Granicus come in and give us addresses and trying to identify it that way. I don't know that it's an option. I just think when I go back to council, if council starts to ask, where was the committee? I'm just trying to get an idea of, is this another issue that we're split on, or is this something that we should?
I think the things go hand in hand.
The licensing and the.
is there enough money to be made on 2% of 75 plus a couple of resorts?
Okay.
Well, again, 2%, $5 million. We
I
gotta
mean,
make
we do a show of hands then for who would be in favor of the mat tax and who would be against. So all in favor of who would be in favor of the mat tax? Who is against the mat tax?
Can we separate that? I'm in favor of mat tax if we have a licensing regime.
Okay, no, that's
Okay,
fair.
okay.
I'm not in
That's
favor
fair.
that we're just gonna hit Burley Island Lodge with more overhead.
Right,
Okay.
okay.
That's
Okay.
fair, that's fair.
So,
I'm like
So it's a no.
Okay,
I
Okay.
would not with doubts through them.
so 3, 4 and 3 against on the twin, is that correct?
that's okay, as long as I
Okay.
have something
Yeah,
to
as
provide
long as-
back to
okay.
council, that's fine. No,
Okay.
that's a fair comment.
I understand. Yep. Sorry.
And I think you'll find if you travel a lot, you'll find that there's a hotel tax all over the world. That's just a normal thing that you pay as part of your hotel
Yes.
expenses. You know, I mean, I don't think that's something that's just relevant for the municipality or even for Canada or that's just a known thing given.
Just tax the daylights, everybody. That's a Canadian way.
Okay, well, again, my thanks to all the committee. And again, I think Alana will, between Alana and Martina, I will send out. You're more than welcome to come to that council meeting and see the presentation to council.
Definitely.
And staff will present it to, present that to council and I have no idea where that will go with council, but that's what's gonna take place, I guess. And thanks, oh, sorry, Nina.
Just a quick question. When, is there a timeline of when that presentation will be made?
Through the chair, my expectation is we should be able to get it in front of council, either the second meeting in September or the first meeting in October. It's not that it's a lot to compile. I know our September 19th agenda is growing rapidly. So we'll just have to see what our timeline is like, but certainly if council wants to move forward with any kind of a licensing regime, staff need time to put that in place and get that in order and with the budget coming up, all of that kind of thing. So certainly won't be later than the first meeting in October.
Okay, all right, a motion to adjourn. Jeff and Richard, Jeff and Richard, all in favor? Carried. Okay, thanks, everybody. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you, Alana, thank you, Martina.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Nina.
Thank you.